All right, so today we will start our look at the American court system, okay? Well, if you look at your graphic organizer, what does it say at the top? Dual court system, okay? That is an important, vocab thing, and it's a really important distinction for this part of the government versus the executive branch or versus the legislative branch. On the next slide, I'm going to show you a picture, and I'm going to work you through this dual court system, okay? So, on the right-hand side, these are going to be our state courts, okay? And I'm going to show you specifically Texas because that's where we live. Most states are going to look similar. We have a few things that we do different than some other states just because of our size, but it all kind of follows this same process, okay? So we have city, county, or state district courts, okay? On the federal side, the equivalent is going to be U.S. district courts. And then we have U.S. Supreme Court, okay? The reason I'm showing you those three at the same time is all three of those courts have something called original jurisdiction, okay? Lawrence is nodding his head. What does original jurisdiction mean?
They have, basically, their jurisdiction of, maybe all things, right?
Close. If it's original, what does that mean? What does that word original mean? The first, right? So if they have original jurisdiction, what do you think that means?
They have the first say.
Good. They have the first say. So U.S. district courts, city, county, and state courts, and a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit of the cases that go before the U.S. Supreme Court fall under something called original jurisdiction. Original jurisdiction means it's the first time case is heard. You're probably going to have a jury. You're going to have a judge. You're going to have a verdict. Okay? So this is really when you think of court, this is what most courts are. Okay? And where your case is going to go is simply a matter of what kind of case it is. So, let's say that David, this afternoon, decides to rob a bank. All right? If he does that, that is a crime against the United States government because they have defined it as a crime. So if he were to be arrested and charged, he would be charged right there, okay? If Bree decides this afternoon that she is going to vandalize Frisco Commons Park, that's a crime against the city of Frisco because they have the right to define that as a crime. So then they create a city court that can adjudicate that. Yes, sir.
Where is the city court?
It's down off of Main Street. It's just kind of there's an old kind of city council, a city hall building that used to be there, and it's back in there. I had jury duty there one time, but anyway. If you ever have to go pay a ticket, it's that's where you go. It's right off of Main Street. If you punch a police officer, okay, that's a crime against the state of Texas, all right? But I also need you to understand that this has nothing to do with gravity. If you punch a police officer, that's a crime against the state of Texas. If you are speeding and your speeding fine is phenomenal, because you're going super, super fast, it's reckless, that's a crime against the state of Texas. If you murder 20 people in a public building, that's a crime against the state of Texas. It's not about gravity, it's just about who had the right to define it as a crime. Why do all of these people have a right, or all these institutions have a right to define their own crimes?
Federalism.
Very good, because of federalism. Because if everybody can say what a crime is, then everybody can also create a court to adjudicate that. Okay? All right, the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is really special. A very, very, very small part of the cases that they hear go only to the Supreme Court. Those are cases where one state sues another state, or cases involving ambassadors. So a lot of the things that I think of are a lot of times it has to do with border rights, access to resources. So Texas and Oklahoma have sued each other over where their border is going to be, and the Supreme Court has actually defined what that border is going to be because it's been fighting over access to the Red River and who owns the Red River. Where is the Red River?
No, I'm saying so the border is the Red River.
Yeah, and they defined it as it's the northernmost vegetation line, I believe. So it can change, right, based on the level of water.
Oh, wow, that's
I know, that's what I heard, but I don't know a whole lot about that. So that's a lot of times when states will get involved. But you guys, that is really like super, super rare. So the majority of cases that the that the Supreme Court has are not going to be that kind of case. If an ambassador is going to be charged with a crime, that would go only to the Supreme Court, but I can't find any examples of that actually happening. So, because I think we would just pretend that away. Okay. All right. Then we have another kind of a jurisdiction. That is called appellate jurisdiction. Okay? Appellate. And so appellate jurisdiction means that we're not looking at guilt or innocence. We're simply trying to understand like questions of law. So your state court of appeals, U.S. Circuit Courts, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, and the Texas Supreme Court, so these four right here, all have appellate jurisdiction, as does the U.S. Supreme Court. Okay? So let me kind of walk you through so you understand like the difference in original and appellate. Okay, let's go back to David's situation. All right, so David this afternoon, he's just like, senioritis gets the better of him. He had a bad basketball practice. He just, like, he doesn't really know what's going on. And so he decides that, you know what, I'm just going to rob a bank. That's the way for me to go. Okay? If he does that, okay, he can be charged by the United States government. And the case would end up starting right here, and it would be U.S. versus David, right? And they would charge him. And so let's say that he goes to trial, right? Original jurisdiction. He's going to have a jury. He's going to have a judge. When the government prosecutes him, let's say that his parents are just like so embarrassed, can't believe that you did that, and they decide that they're not going to support him financially, okay? Well, that's a problem, right? Because like court costs are really super expensive. So now that David is independent and he has no money, the government's going to have to give him an attorney, according to the Sixth Amendment. So let's say that they appoint an attorney, and the attorney is terrible. Forgets to show up, does a bad job, doesn't really want to defend David, like annoyed that the government appointed them. So they just don't want to do it, and David loses like super quickly, and he's found guilty. Okay? What's going to happen there is that David will have an opportunity to appeal his case, and he would appeal to where the arrow goes. So the arrow goes to the U.S. Circuit Court. The U.S. Circuit Court is not going to involve issues of guilt or innocence. It's going to involve issues of constitutionality. Was our behavior fair? Did we follow the law the way the law was supposed to be written? And so what's going to happen there is the case will be written differently then. So before it was U.S. versus David. Well, because he lost, it now becomes David versus the U.S. So it's always written loser versus winner. So think about all the cases you learn in U.S. history. Whoever the first name was, that's because they were the loser. And so they're asking that higher court to make a different decision than what the previous court said. Yes, sir?
So when it says, like, you say U.S. versus Lopez, was loser.
Yeah, they will.
Yeah, they lost in the previous court, and they're asking the Supreme Court to make a different kind of decision.
Like Brown versus Board of Education.
Brown lost at the previous level, and they're asking the Supreme Court to change their mind. Okay? All right. So when David files an appeal there, he's asking the Supreme Court to look at what happened at the district court and to decide, you know, like what my fate should be. He's not disputing it. Y'all, he robbed the bank. Like, he knows that he did it. But, you know, as he's sitting there in his jail cell, he says, you know what, I remember Miss Rosenfeld teaching us about the Bill of Rights, and I just, like, I feel like the Sixth Amendment says I have a right to a competent attorney. It says you have a right to an attorney, but I think that really means that attorney should be competent and that they should be fair. And so he asked the circuit court to take his appeal. What's going to happen is you're going to have a panel of judges there. So it could be anywhere from like 3 to 5. It just depends on how busy the court is and what's going on. And they have a couple of options. They can say, if they take the case, they can say, oh, wow, like you really, really screwed up, but we didn't protect your rights. So we're going to set you completely free.
For real?
Can say, yes, you did this. Yes, we violated your rights, but the evidence is so overwhelming, even if we had given you a competent attorney, this would have stood. So we're going to go ahead and uphold your conviction, but we're going to make sure in our decision to indicate that we need to start giving better attorneys. Or they could uphold his conviction, and they could say, we see no violation. The Sixth Amendment does not mean that you're guaranteed a competent attorney. It just means an attorney, okay? The only option, if they went with that third, David could appeal again. The major difference, you guys, is that the Supreme Court hears less than 100 cases a year. They don't have a set number. I mean, the smallest number I've ever seen, I think, was like 60-something, and the largest number I've ever seen is 110. They don't, and we're going to look in a little bit at, like, what is it that causes the Supreme Court to take up a case, but for most situations, if your appeal is even granted, it's going to stop right there, okay? Go ahead, David.
What was the recent Supreme Court case?
What was, oh, there's a whole bunch. They're in session right now. There's all kinds.
They just choose. That's up to them. They choose and whichever one.
Yeah, they do choose their own cases.
Was Zimmerman one, was that just?
No. No. This side is where actually most court action happens, okay? 95% plus, really hear what I'm saying, you guys. 95% plus of criminal activity is defined under state law. We have this misconception in our country that federal means worse. Federal doesn't mean worse, it's just different. You know,
95%
is defined under state law. Murder, rape, like all of it. Think about the fact that the Constitution is really limited, so the federal government can't define a ton of things as crime. If you murder somebody on a federal property, then it can be a federal crime. But otherwise, it's a crime against the state. So if you steal money, that's a crime against the national government because they have the right to create a post office. Okay? So really, most stuff's going to happen over here. So we have in Texas, like I said, we have city courts. City courts are going to handle like, you know, just like minor municipal kind of things, misdemeanor crimes. A lot of it's traffic violations. I think just minor in possession go there. I'm not really sure. That might go to county. I'm not 100% sure about that. Is it county? Okay. You know what? I think in Texas, juvenile crimes go to the county. I think that might be why that is. Truancy court falls under county, or it always has until recently. And then state district court. So like our state district court is located in McKinney. And so if you end up getting jury duty, or if you end up getting accused of a crime, state district court in McKinney, that's where you're going to go. Okay? The state court of appeals is just like U.S. circuit courts. It's just for the state level, right? So it's doing the same thing. The difference in Texas with our high courts is that we have two. The Texas Supreme Court handles civil law. Eric, what's civil law? Okay, kind of, did you say between civilians? Is that what you said? Okay, so it's between people. If people have disputes or companies have disputes, so it doesn't involve the government.
Wait,
So civil law, say it again?
like Judge Judy? Like,
A lot of times Judge Judy, yes.
okay.
Yeah, so if somebody damages your property, if you have a contract violation, if somebody has caused you irreparable harm, you know, if somebody didn't show up for prom and you're going to sue for like emotional distress. When we say that we're suing someone, that's a civil crime. Or not a crime, I'm sorry, that's a civil lawsuit. That's a person against a person or a company against a company, something like that. Okay? Criminal involves the government. So the government has said you can't do that. That's against the law. That's a problem. So they've defined it and said there's like legal repercussions for that, then that's going to go there. So we split our high courts. One is not more important than the other. It's just a matter of jurisdiction. Not all states do that. Okay, so that's just kind of unique to Texas. One other thing that is very, very different, the Supreme Court has jurisdiction over federal law and state law.